It all started in a place you'd never expect, Circleville, Ohio, a small town. The kind of place where everyone knows each other. They have a big pumpkin show every year. It's quiet, or at least it was. Then the letters started arriving, and they tore the town apart. The year was 1976. Mary Gillespie, a school bus driver, went to her mailbox. She found a letter with no return address. The handwriting was strange, blocky, almost like a child trying to disguise their writing. But the message inside was not childish. It was poison. The letter accused Mary of having an affair. Not just with anyone, but with the school superintendent, Gordon Massey. It was explicit. It was crude. And it was just the beginning. The letter writer knew things. Things about her life, about her family. The letter ended with a threat: stop the affair or everyone would know. The writer was watching. Mary was terrified. She told her husband Ron. Ron Gillespie was also a bus driver. He was a straightforward guy. He loved his wife. He believed her when she said the affair wasn't real. But the letter angered him. Who would do this? Who would write such filth? They tried to ignore it. They hoped it was a one-time thing, a sick prank. But it wasn't. More letters came. Not just to Mary and Ron. They were sent to their relatives, to their neighbors, to the school board where Gordon Massey worked. The writer wanted to destroy Mary's reputation. They wanted to ruin her life, and they were succeeding. The letters were all the same. That same blocky handwriting, the same angry, accusatory tone. They were postmarked from Columbus, about 25 miles north of Circleville. This gave the writer a layer of anonymity. It could be anyone. Life became a nightmare for the Gillespies. The whole town was whispering. People looked at Mary differently. Was it true? Where there's smoke, there's fire, some people thought. Ron became obsessed. He had to find out who was doing this to his family. He and Mary started their own investigation. They made lists of people who might hold a grudge. A disgruntled parent from the school bus route. A jealous colleague. The list grew, but they had no proof. Ron started carrying a gun. He was on edge all the time. He told his family he knew who the writer was. He suspected Paul Freshour. Paul was his sister's husband. He was family, but there had been some bad blood, some tension between them. Ron thought Paul was jealous. He didn't have solid evidence, it was just a gut feeling. But he was convinced. The sheriff, Dwight Radcliffe, was involved now. He looked at the letters. He interviewed the Gillespies. But what could he do? It was just anonymous mail. There were no fingerprints. Without a confession or a solid lead, his hands were tied. He told Ron to be careful, to let the police handle it. But Ron couldn't let it go. Then, on a hot August day in 1977, the phone rang at the Gillespie house. Ron answered it. His daughter was in the room. She said her dad's face went dark. He was angry. He hung up the phone, grabbed his gun, and said he was going to confront the letter writer. As he got in his pickup truck and sped off, that was the last time his family saw him alive. A short time later, Ron's truck was found crashed into a tree on a quiet country road. He was dead. In the truck, police found his pistol. It had been fired once. One bullet was missing. Sheriff Radcliffe investigated the scene. The official conclusion was that Ron had been drinking. He lost control of his truck and crashed. The gun, Radcliffe theorized, must have gone off to crash. An accident. Case closed. But Mary and the rest of the family didn't believe it. Ron wasn't a big drinker. And what about the phone call? Who had called him? What did they say that made him so angry he would race off with a gun and the single-fired shot? It felt wrong. It felt like more than an accident. Mary was sure the letter writer had killed her husband. Maybe not by pulling the trigger themselves, but by driving him to his death. The town mourned. But for the letter writer, Ron's death wasn't an end. It was an opportunity. The letters started again, and now they were even more vicious. They taunted Mary about Ron's death. They called her a widow who got what she deserved. They threatened her children. The poison pen was relentless. For years, the letters kept coming. Mary lived in constant fear. She felt like she was being stalked by a ghost who knew her every move. The police were still stumped. The letters kept coming, postmarked from Columbus. The writer was careful. They were a shadow in the town and no one could find them. The mystery deepened. Who was this person filled with so much hate? The writer seemed to know things that only someone close to the school system or the bus drivers would know. Schedules, routes, personal gossip. This pointed back to the circle of people the Gillespies knew. Then, in 1983, 6 years after Ron's death, the writer escalated from words to actions. Mary was driving her bus route. Along the road, she saw a sign. It was a crude, ugly sign with more insults directed at her daughter. This had happened before. Usually Mary would stop the bus, get out, and tear the sign down. It was humiliating, but she had to do it. So, she stopped the bus, she walked over to the sign. It was attached to a fence post. She grabbed it to pull it down. As she pulled, she noticed a string. The string was tied to the sign and led down into a box on the ground. It was a booby trap. Inside the box was a pistol. It was aimed right where her head would have been. The string was tied to the trigger. When she pulled the sign, the string was meant to pull the trigger. It was a trap designed to kill her. By sheer luck, the gun malfunctioned. It was loaded, but it didn't fire properly. The mechanism was tangled. Mary stared at the gun, her heart pounding. This wasn't about secrets and rumors anymore. This was attempted murder. Now, Sheriff Radcliffe had something real to work with. A physical crime scene. A weapon. He recovered the gun. He traced its serial number. The gun had been sold years ago. The buyer was a man named Paul Freshour. Suddenly, Ron Gillespie's old suspicions seemed true. Paul Freshour was Ron's brother-in-law, the one Ron had suspected all along. Sheriff Radcliffe brought Paul in for questioning. Paul Freshour denied everything. He said he had sold the gun years ago. He couldn't remember to whom. He said he had nothing to do with the letters or the booby trap. He seemed cooperative. He even agreed to a handwriting test to compare his writing to the letters. The state's top handwriting expert examined the samples. The expert's conclusion was definitive. Paul Freshour's handwriting, when he tried to disguise it, was a match for the writing in the Circleville letters. It was the smoking gun the prosecution needed. Paul Freshour was arrested and charged with attempted murder. The town of Circleville was stunned. Could it really be him? Paul was a quiet man. He had a family. He worked at a local factory. But the evidence seemed strong. The gun was his. The handwriting expert said it was a match. The prosecution painted a picture of a bitter, resentful man, perhaps jealous of the Gillespies, who launched a campaign of terror that ended in attempted murder. Paul's wife, Karen, who was Ron Gillespie's sister, stood by him. She insisted he was innocent. She said he couldn't have done it. Paul himself maintained his innocence. He claimed he was being framed. He even passed a polygraph test, but that wasn't allowed as evidence in court. The trial was a sensation. The key evidence was the handwriting analysis. The defense argued the handwriting analysis wasn't a perfect science. They said it was subjective, but the jury was convinced by the state's expert. And then there was the gun. Paul couldn't provide a good explanation for how his gun ended up in that booby trap. In October 1983, Paul Freshour was found guilty of attempted murder. He was sentenced to 7 to 25 years in prison. The people of Circleville breathed a sigh of relief. The case was closed. The monster who had terrorized their town for years was finally behind bars. Mary Gillespie could finally feel safe. The letters would stop, but they didn't. Paul Freshour was sent to the Lima Correctional Institution. He was locked away, and yet the letters started appearing again. They had the same blocky handwriting, the same threatening tone. They were postmarked from Columbus, which was near the prison. They were sent to Mary, to the local newspaper, to the TV show Unsolved Mysteries, which was now looking into the case. They were even sent to Paul Freshour himself in his prison cell. One letter sent to the newspaper read, "Now when are you going to believe you have the wrong person?" This was the strangest twist of all. How could a man in a state prison continue to send these letters? The prison authorities were baffled. They put Paul in solitary confinement. They monitored his mail, they restricted his access to pens and paper, and still, the letters got out. They were postmarked from Columbus, meaning someone had to be mailing them from there. Was Paul working with someone on the outside, an accomplice who was still at large? Or was this a copycat, someone who had perfectly mimicked the writer's style? Or, the most chilling possibility of all, was Paul Freshour innocent? Had the real writer framed him for the booby trap and was now mocking the justice system? The Unsolved Mysteries segment on the Circleville letters brought the case to a national audience. People all over the country were fascinated by the bizarre story. The show highlighted the major problem the letters continuing from prison. It made people question the conviction. Paul Freshour always maintained his innocence. From prison, he wrote letters to investigators, to reporters, to anyone who would listen, pleading his case. He insisted he was a victim. He argued that the real writer had set him up perfectly. The writer knew he owned that specific gun. The writer knew how to mimic his handwriting. He believed someone close to the family, someone with a deep-seated grudge, was the real culprit. After serving 10 years, Paul Freshour was released on parole in 1994. He returned to a town that was still divided about his guilt. He spent the rest of his life trying to clear his name. He was a free man, but he was never free from the shadow of the Circleville letters. He died in 2012, still officially the man responsible, but for many, a man who went to his grave with a cloud of doubt hanging over him. So if Paul Freshour wasn't the writer, who was? The question haunts Circleville to this day. There are theories, lots of them. One theory centers on Paul's ex-wife, Karen Freshour. Remember, she was Ron Gillespie's sister. During the trial, she supported Paul. But after he went to prison, their marriage fell apart. Some investigators and amateur sleuths have wondered if she was involved. Did she have a grudge against her brother and sister-in-law? Did she write the letters and frame her own husband? It seems unthinkable, but in a case this strange, nothing is off the table. After Paul was released, he himself began to suspect her. He thought she might have been having an affair, and the letters were a way to deflect attention. But there was never any proof. Another popular suspect is a man named David Longberry. He was another school bus driver who worked with Mary and Ron. He reportedly had a crush on Mary, but she wasn't interested. Some people who knew him described him as an odd loner. Could a spurned crush have motivated such a long and vicious campaign of harassment? He was in the right place at the right time. He knew the people involved, he knew the bus routes. But again, there's no hard evidence linking him to the letters. He was questioned but never charged. And what about the original accusation? The affair between Mary Gillespie and the superintendent, Gordon Massey. Both always denied it, but the writer was so insistent, so certain. Was there a grain of truth that started it all? Or was it a complete fabrication designed to cause the most damage possible? We'll likely never know. Mary Gillespie has since passed away, taking any final secrets with her. The central mystery remains the letters from prison. The authorities at the time insisted that there was no way Paul could have sent them. They claimed it was impossible. So who did? If Paul had an accomplice, they were never identified. If it was a copycat, they were remarkably skilled and dedicated. Some people believe Paul was guilty of the booby-trap, but not the letters. Maybe the original writer stopped, and Paul, angry at the accusations, decided to take matters into his own hands with the trap. Then, when he was in prison, the original writer started up again. This would explain how his gun was at the scene. But it still leaves the identity of the original writer a mystery. What makes this case so chilling is its intimacy. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was personal. The writer knew the Gillespies. They knew their routines, their secrets, their fears. They used that knowledge to slowly, methodically dismantle a family's life. They turned a husband against his wife's supposed lover. They created an atmosphere of paranoia that led to a man's death. They tried to murder a woman, and they terrorized a small town for over a decade. The letters eventually stopped in the mid-1990s. No one knows why. Maybe the writer died. Maybe they moved away. Or maybe after all the pain and chaos they had caused, they were finally satisfied. The official story is that Paul Freshour was the Circleville letter writer. He was convicted in a court of law. But the unofficial story, the one told in whispers in Circleville and in online forums dedicated to unsolved mysteries, is far more complex. The evidence is messy. The timeline is bizarre. The central question of how letters were sent from a high-security prison has never been satisfactorily answered. So, who sent the chilling Circleville letters? The honest answer is, we don't know for sure. The law has its answer, but it's an answer that leaves too many questions behind. The poison pen of Ohio might have belonged to Paul Freshour, or it might have belonged to a jealous family member, a scorned coworker, or some other shadow hiding in plain sight. The truth is buried somewhere in the past, in the secrets of a small Ohio town that was turned upside down by a stack of anonymous letters. The writer created a legacy of fear, doubt, and unresolved mystery that lingers to this day. They got away with it. And that, perhaps, is the most chilling part of all.